All right, hello Cloud Gurus, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at the Serverless Application Model, also known as SAM. So SAM is an open source framework that allows you to build serverless applications really easily. All right, so what is SAM exactly? Well, this is a CloudFormation extension that's optimized for serverless applications. And on top of CloudFormation, it defines a number of new resource types. So you can define functions, APIs, tables in DynamoDB, and a number of other things. With just a few lines of configuration, you can define the application you want and model it using SAM. And SAM supports anything that CloudFormation supports. So again, it's just a superset of CloudFormation. You can also run your serverless applications locally using Docker. This not only makes it ideal for unit testing, but you can also save on your bill because you're not consuming any resources inside AWS when you're testing. You can also use SAM to package and deploy your applications using code deploy. So let's take a look at what a SAM template looks like. Now, if you're familiar with CloudFormation, this should look really familiar. I'm just going to walk through this sample Hello World template and explain what everything is doing here. So here at the top, this section here tells CloudFormation that this is a SAM template. Notice we have on line 2 this transform. When we deploy the SAM template, CloudFormation will recognize that this is a SAM template and transform it internally into something a little more low level. This next section here is a global section. If we have a number of lambda functions that we define in our SAM template, and they all have certain attributes in common, for example, the function timeout, we don't need to repeat ourselves in every single resource, we just set it here in the globals. This basically just applies the same properties to all our functions. Now, like with CloudFormation, we have our resources section, and as we can see here on line 11, this is one of the new serverless types, AWS Serverless function. This not only creates a lambda function from our local code, but it also creates an API gateway endpoint, mappings, and permissions for you automatically. It's much, much simpler than trying to do this in straight CloudFormation. So you can see here this is a lambda function written in Python that's exposed via an API gateway. You could see on line 20 the path is hello, and on line 21 we're using an HTTP GET method. Now the output section is going to give some relevant information for you. It's going to output the API gateway endpoint URL that it automatically generates for you, along with the Lambda function's ARN and the IAM role that it also creates for you. Now, aside from API gateway, SAM lets you integrate your Lambda function with a number of event sources. So you can see here we have a lot of different AWS services, all of which can trigger a Lambda function. We have Alexa skills, IoT rules, SNS topics, SQS queues, DynamoDB tables, CloudWatch API gateway like we just saw, and so on. Now I'm going to switch over to a terminal where I have the SAM CLI already installed on an EC2 instance in my account. I'm going to show you how easy it is to deploy a sample application. Okay, so I've already SSH'd into my EC2 instance, and I've already installed the SAM CLI. And we get started by issuing the command SAM init. Now this is going to ask us a number of interview-style questions about what we'd like to do. I'm just going to do one of the quick start templates here, so we'll choose number 1. And as you might recall from another lecture, Lambda offers a number of language runtimes. I'm going to choose Python 3.7 here. We can use the default project name of sam-app, that's just fine. And it's going to clone a template from GitHub for us. I just want to choose the Hello World example, so we'll pick number 1. Okay, so let me clear the screen so you can see what's going on. So it created a directory for us called sam-app. So we'll go into there, and you'll see we have a number of files. The one that we're mainly interested in is template.yaml. So let's take a look at that in our editor. So again, like I explained before, we have our transform, which is going to tell CloudFormation that this is a SAM template. We have our description, our globals, our one resource, which is our Hello World function. This is a Python function. And this is our API gateway mapping, and we have a number of outputs. Now this is going to work right out of the box. We don't need to edit anything, so we're just going to quit out of here. But I do want to walk through the Python function for you. Now if you're not a Python developer, that's okay, I'll explain everything for you. So let's take a look at app.py. Now out of the box, this really doesn't do anything terribly interesting. It just outputs a hello world message. And that's fine, but we'd like it to do something just a little more complicated. So I'm going to uncomment a couple of these lines here. First, I'm going to uncomment this import requests. And I'll come down here and I'll show you exactly why we need to uncomment that. So in this try except block here, we're going to make a request from our Lambda function out to checkip.amazonaws.com. This is going to give us the public IP address of our Lambda function's execution environment, which is kind of interesting information because that's not exposed to you typically. So we'll uncomment that, and we want to output that IP address along with our hello world message in our JSON response. So we'll uncomment that, and we'll save and quit. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that this function uses a third-party library called requests. Now, it's a little hard to read, but you could see on the line just before the prompt here that it does have the word requests. What this is telling our environment is that we have a third-party library that we want to include with our Lambda function. So I'm going to walk through the build and deploy process, which is going to package up that third-party requirement, that requests library, and deploy this into our AWS account. So let's back up to our parent directory here, and we'll do sam build. All right, so our build succeeded. Let's clear the screen one more time. So now we're going to deploy our application using sam deploy -- guided. Now this is going to ask you a number of interview-style questions about your application, and it'll use those responses to configure CloudFormation for you. So first it's asking our CloudFormation stack name. We can use the default sam-app, that's just fine. It's asking our region, we want US East 1, and it's asking if we want to confirm changes before we deploy. Now in a production environment, we definitely want to answer yes to this, but for the purposes of this demo, we can just say no. Now the SAM CLI needs an IAM role to be able to connect to the resources in our template. So we're going to say yes and allow it to create that role. Now this question here is asking about authorization. We're exposing a Lambda function via API gateway without any authentication or authorization defined. In other words, anyone on the public internet can anonymously invoke our Lambda function via API gateway. You might not always want to do this, so just keep this warning in mind. But for now, we could say OK. And we could save our arguments to samconfig.toml. That's just a config file that's going to store all these responses, so the next time we run sam deploy, we don't have to answer the questions again. So here in the background, it's creating the SAM CLI IAM role for us, along with an S3 bucket where it's going to stage our deployment. Okay, so now it's creating our CloudFormation stack change set for us. You could see all the different resources that it's creating for us. So we have our Lambda permission, our IAM role, the Lambda function itself, and the API gateway deployment, stage, and REST APIs. Okay, so it's all done, and you can see in the output section the IAM role created for our Lambda function, the API gateway endpoint URL, which we can use to invoke our Lambda function, and the function's ARN itself. Now before we execute this, I want to switch over to the AWS Management Console and walk through everything that was created for us. So let's go to API Gateway, and you can see it created one API here, which is a REST API called sam-app. We can see we have one resource here called hello, and this responds to a GET request. The request comes in and it's proxied to our Lambda function. So let's take a look at that. We can see our Lambda function here, hello world function, which is triggered by API Gateway. And then we have our function body right here. So we'll switch back to the command line and we'll perform an HTTP request, hitting this API Gateway endpoint, and we should see the response from our Lambda function, which will include the message hello world and the public IP address of our Lambda function. So we'll copy that out. We'll clear the screen, just make it easier to read. We'll do curl, our endpoint URL. And just like that, you could see our message is hello world, and our location is the public IP address of the Lambda function's execution environment. Really, really cool stuff. So that was SAM, the serverless application model. This is really the best way to define and deploy your serverless applications. If you have any questions, please reach out. If not, please move on to the next lesson. Thanks.